This story is about these two black-eyed kids I was unfortunate enough to meet. I was indifferent to them because, of course, I never experienced them personally, but I do wholeheartedly believe in the paranormal, and after my experience, I'm sure they are out there. I got off late one night, but I was really itching to go for a run. Due to a double shift, I hadn't been able to for the last 2 days. I preferred running at night because I got to be alone with my thoughts and enjoy the cooler breeze and peace, so I didn't want to miss this opportunity. I changed real quick, put my hair up, and locked the door behind me. I had created my own path, taking advantage of an incline which, looking at my path on my fitness app, it almost did a figure 8. So I went around the corner before the last turn to be back on the same street of my house. Looking up ahead, I could make out 2 people standing at the corner, almost like they were waiting to cross. However, they weren't facing towards either of the crosswalks. They were facing towards me. This immediately caused alarm bells to go off, so I had slowed down to a walk. As I got closer, I could make out their features better, and from the looks of it, these 2 were kids. One was definitely older than the other, like maybe about 14 and 8, but their clothing was odd. They were both in one of those long, old-fashioned nightgowns. Think Little House on the Prairie style. I thought it was odd to see these 2 younger girls wearing something like that, but then my mind went to some of the worst case scenarios. What if these girls had been kidnapped and escaped? Maybe they were just lost and confused. So I called out to them and asked if they were okay. No response. I still felt uneasy about the situation, even more so since they weren't responding. So then I thought, maybe they were a distraction so someone could abduct me. I got a little closer and again asked if they needed help with anything. When they didn't respond again, I told myself I did my good deed in trying to check on them. They didn't seem interested in my help, so I decided to nope my way from the situation and cross the street before reaching that corner. This of course meant that I had to cross again twice to get back on the correct side. Once I got back on the same side, I noticed they had turned to face me yet again. I just picked up my pace to a sprint and ran back to my home. Once I got in, I locked the door and went to splash water on my face to calm me down. Afterwards, I took off my shoes, and as I was walking towards the kitchen to get some water, there was a knock on my door. My stomach just dropped, and I regretted living alone at that point in time. I slowly approached the door and looked out the peephole and saw those 2 same girls standing on my doorstep holding hands. It was like she was staring right at me through that little hole. However, I could clearly tell now by the porch light that their eyes were pitch black. There was no white part. There was no iris, just pure black. I started getting this overwhelming sense of dread just looking at them. So I slowly and silently backed away from the door, thinking they couldn't possibly have known this was my place. There was a tall hedge on the other side of my neighbor's place that would have blocked their view if they were still on the corner, and when I was unlocking my door, I looked around and I couldn't see them either. I hadn't even turned on any lights yet in the living room, and there was only a light on above the sink in the kitchen, so they couldn't have seen any light through my curtains either. I couldn't make out sense as to how they knew this was my home. However, as I backed away from the door, without saying anything, I could hear the girl say, "Ma'am, can we please use your phone? We need to call our mom." I didn't know how to react. How would they have even known I was at the door? So I just stood there without making a sound, contemplating what to do when they spoke again. "We know you're home, ma'am. Please, can we come in to use your phone?" So I approached the peephole again, and while looking at them, I asked, "What are you two girls doing outside alone this late at night in the first place?" I watched as they both turned and looked at each other simultaneously and turned back towards the door. It was like they were communicating telepathically or something. They just said, "We got lost. Please, ma'am, can you let us in?" I finally just told them I would call the police for them and they would be able to take them back to their mom. They again looked at each other and back at the door, but didn't say anything. So I backed away and grabbed my cell phone and pretended like I was calling the cops. I guess I grabbed my phone in case I actually had to call them. I started saying out loud, like I was talking to an operator, "Yes, hi, my address is blank, and there are 2 young kids at my door saying they're lost. Can you send an officer to take them home?" After this, I went back to see what they were doing, but they were gone. They weren't on the porch, in my yard, and I couldn't even see them out in the street in front. I was already feeling freaked out by their presence alone, but it felt even worse not knowing where they went. So I called the cops for real. They sent someone out and checked the surrounding area, but they were nowhere to be found. I feel like the cop thought I was a bit crazy, being afraid of some 14 and 8-year-olds, but there was definitely something wrong with them. What were they going to do if they did get inside? Either way, I had never experienced black-eyed children before, and I hope I never do again. Back in the 90s, my friend Brent and I would go exploring old buildings that were abandoned or condemned for fun. We didn't have cell phones at the time, and the most we had was his car. So trespassing and sneaking out alcohol was the most excitement we could really have. We lived in Topeka, Kansas at the time, and if you're from there, you know there's a small area to have fun in, and another that's just boring. Or maybe that was just us since we lived on the boring side. Either way, this was our idea of fun. With empty houses or buildings to explore, we had plenty of new places to choose from. One place in particular we had been wanting to check out was the Topeka State Hospital. It had been closed for a while, and with all the rumors of previous patients haunting the place, we desperately wanted to check it out. We also had never explored in a place so big, so we had to try and figure out the best way to get in and when to do it. We drove by it a couple times to see if there was any type of security around it and to see if there was anything immediate that would hinder us. When we were convinced it was going to be an easy in, all we had to do was find a time to do it. So, to not have our parents asking questions about what we were doing, we told them we would be staying at each other's house and then have the night without any suspicion. Friday night, Brent said he was leaving to come over to my place, and I told my parents he was coming to pick me up, and we were off. We each had a backpack with what our parents thought were our clothes, toothbrush, and deodorant, when in reality it had our flashlights, a few supplies we brought like a pocket knife just in case, and a few snacks to eat while we waited. We learned over time the fewer things we brought the better, especially if we needed to get out quickly and ditch our bags. We parked several feet up from the building to try to make it not look so suspicious, and sat in the car and ate. We thought we'd kind of scope out the place to see if anyone came by and to get any last-minute jitters out of us. After about half an hour, we decided it was time to go now, before we chickened out. We approached the building and, not to our surprise, the front door was completely locked and boarded up. So we walked around the side, seeing if there was any other way in, when Brent noticed a window that had been broken out and haphazardly boarded up with a no trespassing sign attached to it. Now, the boards weren't the best, so it was pretty easy to pry off with just our hands and the little hammer we had with us. So Brent went in first and helped me in, and that was the start of a very long night. Once in, we turned on our flashlight, put on our backpacks, and started looking around. Immediately, the smell hit me. It was very musty, like what a damp old room would smell like. The paint or wallpaper was eerily peeling on the walls, but the oddest part for me was how still the air was. I motioned to Brett to stop for a second just to try and listen, and the only thing you could hear was our slight breaths. You couldn't even hear the sounds of the bugs outside. It was just one of those moments that was hard to explain. However, we didn't want to waste a lot of time and started moving on. We looked through the rooms where the doors were already open and saw much of what you would expect. Bare shelves, broken bed frames and chairs. The restroom stalls were all broken and some of the toilets just busted. There was a lot of graffiti everywhere too, so we obviously weren't the only ones that had been in here. As we looked around and just took in what all we were seeing, we heard what sounded like someone walking slowly above us. A little scared, but also not ready to leave yet, we decided to go up to the second floor to check it out. The stairs were not something I'd want to walk on more than once, but the railing seemed sturdy enough. We made our way up there to see more of the same. Creepy dark hallways, spray-painted doors and walls, and those yellow file folders scattered across the ground. While here, we again heard more footsteps, but nothing else with it. We were just about to head up to the third floor when Brent turned around and looked down the hall again that we were just at. Nothing there again. We got this far without anyone showing up, so we wanted to get all the way to the top. We climbed the stairs to the third floor, where we were greeted with a door slamming this time. I think Brent was a little fed up at this point, with us both not being fazed by ghost stories, or at least not willing to admit it, so he shouted out, "We are not here to harm anyone or anything." After wincing at hearing him unexpectedly calling out, we waited in silence but heard nothing, not even footsteps. We both let out a quiet laugh and continued on. Looking around the rooms, I saw some really old clothes that looked like they had been disintegrating over time, just sitting in the corner of a room. In this same room, I started smelling sulfur. It was almost like there were fireworks going off right in front of me. I walked out of the room quickly and across to where Brent was, who claimed he didn't smell anything at first. I brought him over to the other room where he could then smell it. As we started leaving the room though, the door to the room he was in slowly closed. As I mentioned earlier, there was no airflow in the place. It was still. So there was no way a draft blew this door shut. We stared at the door for several minutes when we started hearing the footsteps again, but they seemed to be quicker than before and getting louder. We walked over by the stairs slowly and waited. That's when I felt a really cold breeze brush my back, and I very clearly heard the word "out" whispered in my ear. I was done. I took off down the stairs, Brent following right behind me, and when I got to the bottom, I leaped out the window we came through and waited as Brent crouched down to do the same. As he was doing this, it sounded like someone was running towards us. I yelled at Brent to hurry up when he nearly dived out the window to get out. We quickly took off to his car, not caring if anyone saw us, and just sat in the car staring at this place for several more minutes to calm down. After a while, we both asked each other if we heard the voice, and that's why we both started running. So at least I know I wasn't the only one. As mentioned, I didn't really believe in the paranormal, but after that experience and reading more about what took place there, I can definitely believe former patients are sadly trapped in there. Brent and I still remember this, but we have not told a single person about it, but have kept this as a personal experience that we will never forget. This is my first time ever really putting this story out into the world, but I figured it was a good idea to share my experience. I went through all of this, and it was a pretty intense time in my life, so maybe it's best to get it off my chest at some point, and now seems as good a time as any. When I was young, my mother was pretty heavy into the occult and claimed herself to be a practicing witch. Whether or not that is related is completely up to you on whether or not you think that stuff is real or has any effect on people around those that are practicing. But because of that, us kids were always hyper aware of the supernatural side of things. We were aware of ghosts, hauntings, demons, and all that. And I've always had a pretty strong belief in the paranormal. And I'm pretty sure we had a haunted house back then, but that's not really here nor there. A little context on who I was at the time. I'm female, and when this all happened, I believe I was just turning 16. Because of my mother's obsession with dark things, I do not scare easily. Mostly because she always had a word to say about anything scary or strange. I have a pretty solid foundation, and there is very little that'll make me jump, flinch, cringe, or be otherwise afraid. My sister, on the other hand, seemed to have been the opposite growing up, in that you could make her jump and scream by just going, "Ah," really loudly at her, even if she knew you were there the entire time. Growing up, the house we lived in was only a 2-bedroom, so it was always a struggle with my younger sister about the room. I was 16, she was 14, and it was a pain to have to sleep there with her in the room because she had no respect for privacy at all. I hit a point where I was pretty tired of being in the same room as her, so I asked my parents if we could figure something out for me moving out of the room. They had told me that they weren't willing to get in the middle of it and that we needed to sort it out for ourselves. My idea of sorting it out, I would just move my bed out of the bedroom and down into what was basically an entry landing for the basement. It wasn't really large enough to be a room, and it was just there as a place to store things outside the laundry room, but to me, it was the best option. At least that's what I thought. It didn't take long for me to really understand how bad of an idea it was to set up my bed in the basement. About 2 nights into this new arrangement, my sister and I were up late watching some dumb TV show on Netflix, and I decided that I needed to head to bed. I said goodnight and headed down onto the landing to get dressed and shut off the light before lying down to go to sleep. No more than a few minutes after lying down, I heard a voice say, "What are you doing?" in a deep whispering tone. I opened my eyes and looked over to my doorway thinking my sister had come down, and I started to say, "I'm going to sleep," when I noticed no one was there. I shook it off after a moment thinking I was just losing my mind when I heard it again, but this time it said, "You're not welcome here." At this point in time, my guess was that it was just a spirit trying to mess with me. Since my mom was into the witchy stuff and all of her occult stuff was in the room next to me, the laundry room, I just assumed it was some spirit that had been attached to something she owned or was brought forward by something she did, and they were messing with me. Thinking it was just a spirit, I told it that this was my home and that it was welcome to stay, but that I had power over it as it was in my domain. I don't know why I felt the need to tell it that I had the power. I just remember that being something I needed to do. I just kind of sat up and waited to see if this thing was going to cause me any more problems, and when I noticed what looked like a hand coming out from underneath the laundry room door. When I say a hand, it seriously looked like a person's hand, but it was pitch black, and it was reaching out toward me from under the door. I stood up and opened the door to see what the hell this thing was, but when I did, there was nothing there. Obviously, I wasn't feeling too good about any of this, but I, again, just thought I was tired and that I was dealing with a basic spirit/ghost that was messing with me. I told it that I wasn't scared of it and that I was going to sleep, then lied back down and pulled the blanket over me. This is when it got genuinely terrifying. I felt the blanket shift slightly, and as soon as I leaned up to look, I felt a hand grab my ankle and pull towards the laundry room. And when I say that it pulled, it absolutely felt like an adult grabbing my leg and trying to yank me away from my bed and into another room. I freaked out and ran over to the stairs and just stared at my bed thinking, what the hell was that? I gave up and decided I would just sleep on the couch and then move my stuff back into the bedroom in the morning. The next morning, when I woke up, I thought maybe I was just dreaming it or that it was just my brain being stupid, but then I looked down at my ankle. My right ankle, the one that was grabbed the previous night, had a massive bruise on it, about the size of a very large hand. The bruise wrapped around my entire ankle, and it kind of looked like the kind of bruise you would get if you were grabbed too hard or held down by someone. This solidified that whatever this was likely not a good spirit and was probably demonic. I told my mother about it. I showed her the bruise, and she said she would cleanse the basement. She did her cleansing and said that it was all good, but I didn't go back down there to sleep. I immediately moved everything back into my sister's room and just told her that she was going to have to deal with it. After that event, I never went back down into the laundry room or even down those stairs, because every time I would hit the top step, I would feel like something was down there and waiting for me. This was honestly the most terrifying night of my life. It was probably my most solid experience with the paranormal. I'm just thankful that whatever this thing was, it wasn't able to latch onto me and follow me out of that basement, because I don't know what the hell I would have done. This happened when I went to a family reunion some time ago. Back then, I didn't know about black-eyed kids or that it even existed, but I have had plenty of paranormal experiences. So when I was talking to some people in a comment section elsewhere about this one, they thought it was a BEK, so I thought I would share it. I was about 14 at the time. My little sister Allie was 7. There were other kids there, all of our cousins and my brother Sean, but this was mainly about Allie and I. The reunion was taking place at a local park and was set up at a shelter. There were lots of people around, lots of food and drinks, and thankfully, lots for us kids to do to stay entertained. There were 2 playgrounds at this park. One was very old, like I wouldn't let my kids play on it without a dozen tetanus shots, and since it was all made of metal, anything you had to grab or sit on was always on fire in the summer. The other playground was much newer and a lot more fun to play on. It was mostly plastic, or at least was metal covered with plastic, so kids didn't fry on it. It was bigger and also had a bigger swing set and other nearby things to play on. Of course, the shelter was closer to the old one, so we were a little further away from the adults. Probably wasn't the best idea not having any adults over there, but there were a few older cousins and other parents with their kids nearby. We spent a lot of time on the playground that day. We even managed to sneak a jug of tea from the party and cups away in a wagon to have our own little party under part of the playground. The under part was built like a playhouse and had a window and door that opened and even a mailbox. I loved it. Anyways, we had probably been out there for 5 or 6 hours by now. The sun was beginning to set as the sky was taking on that pretty pink and orange color, but it definitely wasn't dark yet. Some people had left, but of course, our parents were still there, so we continued to play. At one point, we decided to play a mix of hide and seek and tag, where you hide. If you're found, you can try to run from the it person until you were finally caught. One of our cousins was it at this point, and we all went and hid. He found a few of us, but then ended up saying he had to leave so we could all come out. I told him I'm still not convinced he actually had to leave and was just tired of seeking, as he was known to do that, but I digress. So we all started coming out, and that's when I noticed I didn't see Allie. I asked Sean if he saw her, and he said no, so I started looking around for her when I saw her standing near the fence line, which separated the park from the lake and property on the other side. I don't think there was a house over there, but the lake was over there as well as a bunch of land, trees, bushes, just that. So when I started to approach my sister and saw that she was talking to another little girl that was on the other side of the fence, I was curious as to why she was there and not with an adult. This girl, however, didn't look normal. First, she had on a really outdated dress. I now recognize it as like a Victorian era style. It was long and puffy, like it had a petticoat underneath it. There were layers and ruffles all over with puffy sleeves. She also had on a small bonnet-type hat and had tight black curly hair framing her face. At first glance, it was odd, but a pretty cute outfit. However, all of this was shadowed when I saw her face. I thought the cap on her bonnet was covering it, but in actuality, she had no eyes. It terrified me. I don't know what she was saying, but I cut Allie off as I grabbed her arm, pulling her back away from the fence. Now, unless the girl climbed over the fence, I knew we were safe, as that fence went all the way up to the parking lot. We would have made it to our parents before she reached the lot. But as I pulled her back, I remember saying something like, "Who are you talking to? And what's wrong with your eyes? Are you okay?" Allie said that she noticed her wave when she went to hide and was also curious as to why she was over there, so she approached her. She claims she didn't notice her eyes until I pointed them out, but even afterwards, she didn't seem fazed by it, which was weird. It was freaking me out. Why is it not scaring the 7-year-old? The little girl only said she needed help and asked for us to go to the water with her. We both tried questioning more as to what she needed help with, but she refused to answer, always pretty much repeating the same thing. And it was creepier because it was always in the same tone, but was never with any inflections. So I again asked her what was wrong with her eyes, and after a pause, she said, "I can see everything. Please, I will show you, by the water." No. I said we would get an adult to help, grabbed Allie again, and pulled her away from the fence. Now, my birthday had just recently passed, and my parents got me a camera with replaceable film, so I took it with me everywhere. I even had a little case that I carried it in that went over my shoulder, and I had been taking a lot of pictures that day. I did not hesitate to snap a photo of this girl as we walked back towards the playground. Allie and I walked straight up to my mom and told her what we saw, and she seemed disinterested in our story at first. Then I mentioned something being wrong with her eyes, and that apparently caught her attention. We then walked her back to the fence. However, the girl was gone. Allie and I insisted that it was real, but my mom just shrugged it off as either someone playing a prank, or maybe the girl found her guardians and helped her. We never forgot about it though. Allie didn't seem as disturbed by it, but man, I had a hard time sleeping that night. I kept my lamp on that night and even tried reading something to get my mind off of it before I finally fell asleep. It was probably about 2 months later when my mom finally took me to get my film developed from my camera. I was going through the pictures. I remember specifically taking the picture of the girl, and I wanted to show my mom as proof I was right. I was at that age that I was doing that on a quite normal and annoying basis, I'm sure. However, much to my dismay and relief, the picture was of a grassy field, the fence, and the glistening lake among those photos. But there was no girl standing at the fence. There was no way she would have been able to move out of view for that photo and then go right back to where she was in the amount of time it took me to hold the camera up and snap the photo. I was in disbelief and still am to this day. I have no explanation for it. I even showed the picture to Allie, who remembered the events and was just as surprised at my picture as I was. So, as mentioned, telling some people online about it, they feel there were several indicators of a black-eyed kid. If it was, that was the only time I've ever witnessed one, and it scared the hell out of me. Of all the paranormal encounters I've had, that was probably one of the worst. What would have happened if we went with her to the lake? It freaks me out just thinking about it. So that, my friends, was another collection of paranormal stories. Can't not do paranormal in October, of course. And we also had one in Kansas, so that was interesting, being that that's where I live. So now I want to look into this place. I'm not going to go or anything because that's just not something that I do, but still be interesting to look into. But also along those lines, what about you? Do you know of any places near you that are supposedly haunted? I'd love to hear about it. And anyways, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. And you can also leave me a comment below on your thoughts, or leave an emoji of your favorite fruit. I would say food, but I don't think there's a curry emoji, so I couldn't, so we'll go with fruit. And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. And until next time, take care.